he put the same amount of fertilizer on 66 acres, but he didn't put 100 acres. And he got back and he watered it in time, the production was high in the first third of his crop. He had good production over the whole 2/3 instead of the middle 1/3. So it's production increase. So we came out in 1956 and we produced more rice on a million acres than we did on a million acres. Well, the farmer, about the same time, herbicides become available. Herbicides people do.
What year was this like?
1940, herbicides come out in 1948. The herbicide had come along. Well, but they weren't in full use. Herbicides wasn't in real full use until 1950. 52. We had 2,4-D in 1952. But not many farmers were using it. They were afraid of it. They were afraid it killed something. But the same year that the government, the controls that the government accepted and the farmers accepted, they also started using 2,4-D on all of it. Herbicide on all of it. So we had better weed control, more fertilizer, better managed crop because the farmer was farming 2/3 instead of 1/3. About the same time, this kind of opened the farmer's eyes to what he could do in production. And about that same time, farmers started coming to think that, and about that time, the fertilizer companies come out with a higher analysis fertilizer, 12, 24 pounds. And they started putting 600 pounds of 12, 24 instead of 600 pounds of 4, 12. So they put the same number of pounds, but they tripled it into the gut. And it almost double the production, along with the 2,4-D and the better cultivation, and better management. And at that time the film stations come out with better varieties of rice. In 1950, Blue Bonnet 50 was released. And in 1952, Century Cotton was a variety that matured in 120 days. Blue Bonnet 50 matured in 140 days. Before we got those two varieties, it took us from 145 to 180 days to make it out. And Century Cotton, if you could plant it around the 20th of March, you could harvest it and fertilize it and water it and harvest the second crop or the last crop. So our production began to go up more and more and more. And then, about the time we leveled off with the better machinery, less acres, better management, more fertilizer, better varieties, Romanhoff and Montana come out with herbicide protein. It was a selective herbicide that would kill the grass and not kill the grass. And it doubled that production. This started in about 1966. And then, since then, we have varieties that will harvest from 110 to 125 days. We cut another week off the field. And the farmer, in all those years, with the exception of a few caused by disaster in the world or from changing in government programs, he has not gotten a whole lot much increase in the price of his rice per 100 pounds. That's remained almost constant, within 25%. Now, in 1974, the price of rice went up to $32 per 100.
So is that called because of Vietnam War?
No. Well, it could have a little bit something to do with it. But it was really caused by Secretary Bush and a world situation. This high production of grain. Now, this same story in a little different form could be told by the wheat farmer, by the grain sorghum farmer, hybrid corn and hybrid grain sorghum seed. This increased that production tremendously. And in the wheat, he had new varieties that have some new methods, on how to conserve water in the soil in dry areas in Kansas and Nebraska and in the Midwest. But they got a story they can tell almost parallel. I think rice is ahead of. We've enjoyed more technology more than the dryland farmers do. But we were spending about, the taxpayers, when Secretary Bush was in office, the taxpayers were spending about $20 billion a year to subsidize farming. No, they were spending about $18 billion a year to subsidize farming. See, when I could say something down there. Well, the press and the radicals kept giving the Secretary of Agriculture a tip, giving the farmers a tip about spending all taxpayers' money. So Secretary Bush said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, boys. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of it. So he went out in the world, and he sold it. And all of a sudden, we didn't have any grain. And a disaster somewhere else in the world, Russia, never said make a crop. There's always a problem, one way or the other. And in the other countries who were producers of rice and other grain, a disaster, and all of a sudden there was a shortage of every kind of grain in the world, and then rice in it. You see what happens when there is a shortage of rice and the price gets so high. Countries like China and Indonesia and the Philippines and India and Pakistan and all those poor countries that's ruled by dictatorship practices, they'll just go somewhere and buy wheat and say, we know you don't like wheat, you want rice, but you don't eat wheat. And so the rice industry suffers. We're the last one afraid to move up, except in the extreme conditions. And that extreme hit on the 1974 crop. And rice went for $32 a hundred. But ordinarily, when I first got into the rice business in 1949, rice was selling for about $10, about $12 a barrel. Which is roughly $8 a hundred. Roughly $8 a hundred. Today, you can buy all the rice you need for $8 Back when I started, a man working on the farm, if you want to compare it to labor, will we compare it to labor and to tractor? The tractors we used in 1949 you could buy for $1,000. And a man, like I say, did about 25 acres a day. today, and you paid that man $3 a day, maybe $5, it cost you because you had things and they pick up in the house. It just cost you $5, $6 a day to working on the farm. Now, all of them on the farm in those days, you had to come from the house and pick up the usually good and beef and things that are utilities. So maybe you're going to pay a man $7, $6 a day. Tractor 1,000, 25 acres a day. Today, you pay that man $15,000 to $20,000 a year. Still furnishing a pickup. Sometimes a house. That tractor costs $50,000. But you can do 100 acres a day. But the price of the ride is still $8 to $9 an hundred, $8 to $10 an hundred. So you can see what the production is since 1940 to 1985. If it hadn't been for production, in 40, as late as 1959, the estimated cost, cash flow cost, to farm an acre of rice was $80. Now, it's $550. But a cash flow $500. That's not trying to appreciate. And usually doesn't count the dry and the storage because that's just for that out of the rice for the farm business. So you can see what a drastic change we've had from slavery, farming rice with a hoe, to paying a man working on the farm $20,000 a year, driving $50,000 tractor. But the price of rice from 1949 to 1986, the farmer still getting up this thing. So machinery, technology, and research has made it where the consumer of rice is still buying it at the same price. And that's the reason the farmers are going broke. That's the reason farmers are disappearing from the city area. That's the reason you're having for 80, 84 and 85, a third of our farmers have auction off on the machinery. We are retired or treatment farmers.
Right, around it. So how much is it an average farm? How many acres? Like how did it grow over the years?
Well, let me say this. When I worked at the printing station, I started talking with the dietitian and the contract farmers. And I asked him, how did you decide how much rice you can farm? He said, well, when we got through harvesting rice and salt, took a little break with cows, we started plowing with a team. We got in the end plowed 4 acres of that. With 4 mules pulling 2 moleboards, 2 bottom plows. He said we just plowed until it was time to go to planting, and then we went back and went to disking and planting rice. And many times we never did get planted all we plowed. If the weather had a good spring, well, we planted all we plowed. But if it was a bad spring, we may not even plant that much. So I would say, in the community where I live, and I'm sure rice farming is comparable, a man and his family of a man, woman, and 2 kids could take care of 100 acres. If you had see, the
Yeah, let's talk. You can take what you want to. Okay. Take this and write it down.
well, it took a the wreck of a ship in a storm on the East Coast to get the rice farming industry started in the United States before the Civil War. And this ship captain wanted fresh rice, and he had a Chinese cook, and this cook kept rice and he hulled it every day and cooked it for this captain. Well, when the shipwreck was the Chinese cook salvaged his rice. It doesn't hurt rice to get wet as long as it's in the hull, and then you dry it out. And he saved this rice, and he knew he couldn't get any more, so he planted it. He knew how to grow it too. And this is the way the industry got started. At that time, it was grown in rows. And the slave pulled the grass out of it. And they had a very elaborate watering system along the East Coast there in South Carolina. The tide raises up about a foot every day, or when the moon is left. And they built some gates that would, when the tide rose, it pushed the fresh water, pushed the river up. Not only the tide, but it pushed the fresh water up because it takes the river. And they had some gates that would open up and flood the rice. And then when the tide went down, the gate closed and held a constant flood on these low areas that they couldn't grow anything else anyway. Well, when slavery was abolished, we didn't know how to farm rice in broadcast, and it was too expensive if you had to hire labor to do it. So the rice industry, in its beginning state, died in the state of South Carolina. And then when it was started again by the French people, the German and the French people, who migrated to Louisiana in the Crowley area. Oh, I forget what year. I think I've got a book on that, and I loaned it to somebody else who wanted to do it. On rice, and I don't remember getting it back. But anyway, it was resurrected in Louisiana when we were farming with mules, horses and mules. But it was broadcast. And if the ground was dry, if the spring was dry, then they planted it with a regular wheat or oat drill in a broadcast farming, narrow. And it was harvested with a binder, just like wheat. You cut it and tie the string around it. The binder automatically tied the string around it. And it was dropped out, and then men come along and shocked it, put it in little shocks. And it was harvested at about 20% moisture. And then you let it sit there and let it dry with natural air until it was down below in the paddy form or in the hub, till it dried down below 14%.
So they just spray out of the field. They just leave it in the field and let it dry out.
Well, in a shock, because if you lay it down in this country, it'll rain and the water come up on it. So you have to leave it in the shock. You know what a shock is? Well, you have bundles. You have bundles about that big around.
Yeah.
That's tied with a string. And you stand one up in the middle, and you lean a circle around it, then you lean another circle around it, and another circle around it. And these circles are leaning like the root, like a cone, and the water sheds off. Well, what they'd always do is cut other straw, or break a shock, break a bundle, and lay over the top of it to keep the sun rays net from hitting the rice heads direct. Now in wheat and oats, it wasn't necessary to protect the grain, but in rice, if it got real hot and dry and dried it too fast, it would break up, and your head rice would be low when you milled it. But this is the way it started, and we started, instead of referring to paddy rice by the bushel, like everything else went for, they started referring to it in Louisiana by the barrel. And at that time, the milling industry was also very primitive. And a man would go back in a pile, in a bin, and they had a barrel made, bring it in a barrel on the dolly. And it just so happened that the barrel of rice weighed 162 pounds, and that's what you needed to mill out 100 pounds of mill rice. And for, in Louisiana, in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, until about 1975, I guess. No, about 1970. All rice was sold by the farmer to the mill, or from farmer to farmer, by the barrel, 162 cents. And about that year, the government programs, when they loan buy the rice from the farmer, when you can't sell to anybody else, the government will buy it. And they always bought it by the hundredweight. And then in 1954, I changed the sale of seed rice, began the change of the sale of seed rice from a barrel to 100 pounds, while I was producing foundation seed and trimming stuff. So I could put it in a 100-pound bag. And the whole industry, then it took the industry about 10 years for the industry to change over in seed rice, from 1954 to 1964, 65. And then in 65, we began to talk about selling rice to the mill in 100 pounds. And then in 1970, ARI, Rice Farmers Co-op Mill here in Houston, started buying all their rice by the hundredweights in the industry. Only term
only place in our industry that barrels is used, still used, is by the farmer, talking about his yield from the field, remaking the field. Farmer still talks about that. I don't use barrels at all. I estimate it'll make 2,500 pounds, which is 15 barrels, or it'll make 3,000 pounds, 3,200 pounds, which is 20 barrels, or it'll make 4,000 pounds, which is 25 barrels. See, I still remember, I can still work all these figures, but 30 barrels is about 5,000, 32 barrels. But we still use them. But going back to the farming methods, when tractors were available to the rice farmers, they started using them to do like this. Rice farmers are very, very, very keen to change either machinery or technology. They're ready for it. I guess the slowest change, well, it took farmers longer to change to use more fertilizer than anything else. Up until 1955, when the government put controls on the production of livestock, we were putting out about 400 pounds of 412 which is 16 pounds of N, 32 pounds of P, and 16 pounds of K. N is not as in P as phosphate, and K is phosphate. You know those things? You had chemistry in it. Okay. But when the government, we got so productive after the war, and combines, we started modifying combines, wheat combines, during the war. And we also made a change at the same time to commercial dryers, where we dry rice with natural air and heat. And the combine and the commercial dryer, where we could handle rice, take it from the field direct to the warehouse in a high moisture state, and the moisture will be renewed with a dryer. This increased production.
When did they start using rice droppers and rice farming?
In 1945. This dryer right here was, well, really, probably about 43. This dryer right here was built in 1944, the Katy dryer. The Rock and Debbie dryer was built in 1945. But there was some dryers built in this country in about 43. But really, 40, 44, it was going full swing. It was moving fast in 1945. That's the year the war ended in 46. But the combine did that. And then, of course, by that time we developed pretty fair machinery, nothing real spectacular. We were still using the moldboard saw. We had to turn this all over because we weren't putting enough fertilizer. You had to get down there where bacteria and chemical change had deteriorated, and this would be available for your plant because you wasn't putting enough. You had to use everything there. Well then, with the change in heavier machinery, where a man could plow 25 acres a day instead of 10, we increased, and the farmers during the war was asked to produce because they needed it, all over the world. It was really being wasted, but there was a place for it. But after the war, we had too much rice.
So what they did, the farmers voted for the government to have control, and they cut the acreage production back 1/3. In other words, we were farming at that time about 1,500,000 acres of rice, and they cut it back to 1,000,000. Well, when the farmer had 1/3 less rice to farm, he eliminated his marginal ground. He, instead of farming rice every other year, instead of farming it every other year, he went to farming it 2 years in and 1 out, so he's letting the land rest. And he also put the same amount of fertilizer on 2/3 of the acre. In other words, instead of putting 400 pounds of 434, he went to putting 6. And instead of planting rice until he got it all planted, and by that time, the first he planted, the grass just about had it. The grass was so thick he made very little rice on that. And his middle crop, where he got